documentary papyrology, and also because personally I'm very happy to be back here after a few years. The results I will present today are the products of my recent projects dedicated to the study of Coptic letters from the 4th to the 8th century. The previous one was focused on the materiality, and the current one is supported by the Fritz Thyssen Stiftung, is centered on the edition of a corpus of unpublished Coptic letters kept in Heidelberg. Before I actually enter the topic, please take some time to remember or try to imagine for a moment the act of writing a letter before digital screens and emails, before endless quantities of paper, and certainly before the globalized postal service and supply chains we know today. What material would you use to send a letter? If you live in North America, one would then use the US letter size paper measuring 8.5 per 11 inches, while if you were European, you would probably use a standard A4 sheet of white paper according to our modern standards, resulting in a slight change of appearance. The material will thus convey information about the origin of your letter even before the words inscribed upon it. Previous scholarship has often focused on the linguistic or theological content of Coptic letters, while the materiality and formats of this document has received comparatively less attention. Yet, the materiality of writing, what we wrote on, was not incidental. The choice of the papyrus rather than wood, or ostrakhan rather than parchment, was often dictated by more than availability. It could reflect the sender's social status, the relationship to the recipient, the formality of the message, or even the cultural perception of what medium suited which type of communication. In this sense, the physical support was part of the message itself. Our sources reveal a society acutely conscious of the value of the writing material. This awareness was so profound that scribes often felt compelled to apologize when the ideal material, papyrus, was not available. One can read in the beginning of the famous letter 15, addressed to Romanianus, that Saint Augustine, exemplifies his epistolary practice and provides insights into 4th century scribal habits from northern Africa. There, he apologizes for the writing material upon which the letter was written, here parchment, and explains why he could use neither papyrus nor his waxed ivory writing tablets. Augustine seems to prefer them as writing material to communicate and exchange messages with his patron. In this case, Augustine's letter, now lost in its original form, might have been written on a poor piece of parchment, as the diminutive pellicula is rare and likely derogatory. This phrase has led to various interpretations among scholars, and one of the latest concludes that it was probably a joke about the parchment quality. However, unless you had a very wealthy correspondent, like Romanianus, both patron and friend since childhood, you would not be in a position to write a letter on ivory tablets, but more probably on a papyrus sheet. As for the rest of the papyrological material, we face, as usual, as a huge bias, a very uneven repartition of the discovery from north to south of the country. My main aim today is to briefly mention papyrus as the expected material for the letter, but to focus on the other writing supports to understand some more local trends. In certain ways, clean papyrus sheet is too common to be relevant to us today. The general trends in the country proves, according to my survey, that the provenance of Coptic letters were divided between two regional patterns, generally. In Middle Egypt and the Fayum, Coptic were mostly written on papyrus as expected, while in Upper Egypt, as we've already seen yesterday, was chiefly written on ostraka. There is a cultural boundary which could be placed south of Ahmim, which also coincide with some difference from the language themselves of the dialects themselves. A closer look at chronology refines this picture. Early Coptic letters from the Great Oasis, but also from several dossiers from the Antinopolite and Hermopolite nomes, along with material from Aphrodito and again certain letters from Thebes in the Byzantius dossier, which is dated 6th and 7th century, are written on papyrus. Ostraka are often used in monastic contexts, but not exclusively. By the early 7th century, and especially after the Arab conquest, the papyrus-ostrakan boundary shifts a bit north to Wadi Saga, where now 25 letters, Coptic letters were written on ostraka, while only one single letter is written on papyrus. Indeed, to provide an approximate of the volume of the Theban material I will discuss today, we can make a quick search on trismegistus.org, previously mentioned large database for papyrological repository and datasets and metadata, with the parameters Coptic letter from Thebes written on ostrakan. It gives a bit less than 2,000 stacks, while the same research with papyrus gives 10 times less text, approximately 180 texts. So, but what explains then the abundance of ostraka then in the area? Probably, as we will see later, local trends and also availability, which appear decisive criteria. The whole volume of the Theban material is huge because it represents actually half of the corpus of Coptic letters we have so far, which is close to 5,000 texts. So it's over-represent the region over the rest of the country. In Egypt, the papyrus was then the most prestigious of all writing supports, used as a deliberate choice that acknowledged the recipient status as a present. To send a letter on papyrus to a monastic superior or to an official in the higher administration, it was using papyrus was a sign of respect, a subtle yet powerful recognition of their elevated position. This reveals a deep understanding that correspondence implied not just geographic distance, but also social distance and power relationships. The very appearance of the document mattered immensely. The expectation was clear for everyone. A letter should be written on a virgin, clean sheet of papyrus. When possible, use a specific type of papyrus, which is attested in the text, suited for a letter, which is the Cartes Epistolicos, attested since the 1st century CE. However, when not possible, we find apologetic formulae in Greek stated, since I could not at the moment find a clean sheet of papyrus, I have written on this, which is clearly dirty on the verso and reused. So it was the just available material for this scribe at that time. 2 centuries later, the same expectation remains in Coptic, where we can see on the left side that Petros, so Dioscorus' son, composed a Coptic letter for his sister on a piece of letters which is already damaged because it has written all around the holes. He also has used an unusual format, coming back from the vertical to the horizontal format, which was not in use anymore during the Byzantine period. And so he tried to use the material as much as possible in that respect. Even later, in the 8th and 9th century, I was not able to find a picture of this text. So I put the handwritten edition of it. We find the same formula. blame us not because I was not able to find a clean sheet of papyrus worthy of your honor, with in between the address of a previous line, which is stated in the edition. The same patterns appear on ostraca. In Thebes, the use of the formula, either on pottered ostraca or on limestone ostraca, is attested at the liminal greetings, or also at the bottom, the very final greetings. I was not able to find papyrus to write you a letter. Where am I? Here, just mix the pages. Am I? Yes. It frequently appears that this formula is explained by a lack of papyrus in the Theban region. However, one can see that these Theban text long rolls are covering more than 2 meters long, and that there was even more material to be used, and here a full kolema that was still available, but still been left by the scribe. It could have been cut and reused for a letter. On a more local trend, which has been already also mentioned, this limestone ostraca were specifically attested in Western Thebes as an even more local trend than in the rest of the country. The use of these limestone flakes has been considered even as a provenance hint. When you find some limestone, it has to be Winter Thebes. But there was still a kind of judgmental comments by Crum stating that it was superior in terms of aesthetic because it was white, and also because it was used to write or pen literary text, as well as more formal letters, because of their superior general appearance. The striking example we do have here, so it's the Ostracan do have a picture now, which explains everything. States actually that if it was rhetorical letter containing biblical quotations written on a large limestones, which goes in Crum's direction. It's rhetorical, it has quotations, it's not beautifully written, but it's written in a clear way on the white support, and it has been archived because it was considered as a copy. The text itself says, where it's possible to write down tears and groans upon papyrus, I had filled this letter therewith and sent it to you. And clearly, it's not a papyrus, as you can see. It's a copy, and it was still better to copy it on the limestone flakes as archival purposes. However, recent research, particularly from Jennifer Cromwell, has changed a little bit the perspective on the topic. Instead of using this aesthetic superior value of the limestone, she explained that actually it was a matter of availability. Because instead of, we can see perhaps, sorry for with the numbers, that it's all actually related to the proximity of the temple of Thutmose III, which was actually destroyed and unused at that time. So the more we are close to the temple, the more we are using limestone along the road back to Thebes, and the further you are, the less you use limestone. So it's just more geographic and availability of the support. Beyond papyrus and ostraca, that represent the large majority of the letters, as already mentioned, other less frequent material emerged, each with its own specific set of constraints and use. Parchment is known for its exceptional durability, and was primarily reserved for book production and legal documents due to its high costs, as you all know. Its use for ephemeral texts like letters was indeed very unusual. Yet, we find intriguing exceptions, especially 13 documentary Coptic letters written on parchment that have been edited so far, and I will publish a 14th one kept in Heidelberg in the coming years. There is little to say about the first provenance, unprovenance, and undated palimpsest. We can say nothing about it. It is kept in Duke. It has been written over a washed fragment of parchment containing Thaddeus Parmenides, sorry. And it also was clearly illegible in 71 on this UV photograph, and today only very faint ink traces of the Coptic letter remains. The earliest securely provenanced palimpsest Coptic letters one can still read today comes from the Calice Oasis from the second half of the 4th century. And it also demonstrates the practice of reusing discarded parchment leaf as a writing surface. In that case, this means the previous text was washed off to make some space for new messages. It's as an economical approach for an expensive material in an isolated place, such as Kelis in the Dahle Oasis, far from the Nile Valley. We will come back later on this topic and the particular situation of the Kelis community at that time. Another compelling case is this Coptic letter from the 5th to the 6th century, written on a triangular piece of parchment, clearly a leftover scrap with a large round hole, likely from the animal's leg. It strongly suggests that this letter was penned on discarded fragments of irregular offcuts unsuitable for standard book production. As you can see, on this other example where the parchment has been used for pen trials and doodles. The content of this Coptic letter on top, the bookish handwritings, as well as the material involved clearly shows that this letter has been sent from a book production center. Interestingly, after the Arab conquest, at least 9 out of the 13 edited Coptic letters are written on parchment, and all of them are coming from the Fayum area. It has developed a notable local trend in the use of parchment for Coptic letters, as well as tax receipts and accounts. The last one, Fayum Copt 33, has been identified as a real letter written on the back of Fayum Copt 32, a text that has been considered as an epistolary exercise. So we would have, in that case, a real letter written on the other side of an epistolary exercise. It has been discovered in Der El Amam, so again in southeast Fayum. And we could be perhaps in the same situation as the other case we do have from here, which is another letter in Coptic, late one, written on the back of a choir title list. In both cases, we can reasonably hypothesize that these real letters were written as correspondence to be delivered. Consequently, we discover the parchment leaves at their destination points, not where they were written. The concentration of parchment letters within the single area suggests local communication, that, yes, the communication remains local in the Fayum. This region later became a major parchment book production center, ensuring local availability and continuous tradition of skin preparation since the 4th century, especially in Teuton, which is the ancient Teptunis, which has produced and kept alive this local production of parchment and has produced long and extensive manuscript that was distributed in the nearby monastery as well, and also as far as the Sohag monastery, the White monastery, keeps some manuscript copied in the north in two-tone. The phenomenal thus there's another one, a bit more further north, so still again in the Fayoum, and it dates later on the 8th or 9th century. Here, the dialect use is also of use because we can see that Egypt has from north to south several dialects that also have good clues to locate where the text was actually written. And here's a strong Baharic influence has been recognized, which means that it also locates the text alongside with this parchment support in the region of the northern Fayoum or in between. Then the phenomenon highlights how regional economic factors, skin and book productions, could actually establish an influence on material choice and on the availability of the material itself. Leather, much like parchment, also offered material longevity. It was also primarily used for magical and legal texts, and a few examples are attested in Thebes. Adding to the rare cases, one can quote also a long fiscal register written on leather, and it's all dated from the beginning of the 8th century, which proves also the use of leather for administrative purposes or fiscal purposes in the region. The rare use of leather at Thebes is in contrast to the area of the First Cataract and further south, Nubia. We even have a unique example of a Blemian contract written on crocodile leather. The use of leather can actually be seen as a Nubian practice, since several Nubian and Blemian documents have been discovered in Gebeline, 30 kilometers south of Thebes. However, for letters, leather was extremely unusual. To the best of my knowledge, there is only one known Coptic letter written on leather, now kept in Duke. And this rarity further underscores the specific and often formal context in which such durable and costly materials, such as leather, were employed as identity markers, since this business letter has been exchanged between two Blemi merchants. Now, the Dahle Oasis enigma. Why wood in here? Let me finish with a particular local phenomenon, the popularity of wooden tablets in Kelis, located in the Dahle Oasis. This is where the interplay of social, economic, and practical factors becomes exceptionally clear, as we've discussed previously. The first driver of this widespread adoption of wooden tablets in Kelis could be the dire situation regarding papyrus. Some Kelis letters actually paint a vivid picture of scarcity and expense. We read laments like, "We do not cease to be distressed for lack of papyrus," or direct instructions to scribe, "By no means make a long letter, for they have been said that papyrus is finished." The insufficient supply of papyrus is echoed in some particular phraseology related to the location of the senders, either in Coptic or Greek equivalent, stating that some of them are in the oasis and the others are in the Nile Valley, and they are communicating between the two places. Second, the cost was probably prohibitive. One letter from Kelis explicitly states that papyrus rolls were expensive, and that it has been quoted, I haven't checked the equivalence, that it was actually costing 1,200 talents, which is in the letter a huge price. Given the papyrus crisis, one might expect then Kelis would turn to ostraca, as in the other oasis location around, like in Douche, for instance, where ostraca is largely used. Yet, surprisingly, ostraka were not widely adopted in Kellis. Only 2 fragmentary Coptic ostraka are attested from there or have been published, compared to hundreds of Greek ones. This highlights to me a distinct local preference. The answers lie in their unique advantage within the Kellis context, but it seems that the use of wood could be part of the local trend in the larger Dahle oasis. First, abundant local wood was available. The Dahle oasis provided a large and readily available supply of wood, particularly acacia. These natural resources offered a practical and accessible alternative when papyrus was scarce and costly. But above all, the proximity of skilled carpenters was a huge advantage. Archaeological excavation have yielded concrete evidence, and especially this carpenter workshop, where we have found numerous wooden offcuts, pieces of acacia being worked into codex sheets, and even carpenters' mallets were found. This meant residents had access to skilled craftspeople who could prepare the wooden material for writing. The presence of trained artisans is indeed a significant enabler. Lastly, as we've discussed yesterday, reusability was also a crucial criterion. Wooden tablets possess the remarkable practical advantage to be washable and reused several times. This made them ideal for ephemeral communication within the village or between regular correspondents using the same tables to wooden tablet to erase and write the letter back and forth. In brief, no apological formulae are attested in Coptic letters written on wood. This further reinforces the idea that the choice of wood in Kellis was a pragmatic response to genuine material challenges, but also perhaps of a more relaxed epistolary norm inside the Manichaean community. I conclude here briefly my paper on this attempt to sum up the material used in Coptic letters, so we can just talk about it in the next series of questions about mapping materials. I am happy to answer some of them, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. If you can still hold without caffeine a few minutes, we'll ask questions and then we'll enjoy a coffee break.